The cold of the obsidian hall seeped through the knees of Cassian's trousers, a damp, biting chill that felt like the city's very bones. He knelt on the polished basalt floor, a single shard of gaslight from the high, groin ceiling catching the silver signet ring on his brother's finger. That ring, the emblem of the House of Cinders, seemed to swallow the light, a miniature black hole of authority. Damian Veyro did not sit on the throne of ash, a monstrous thing of petrified wood and melted iron salvaged from the ruins of the First Empire. Instead, he stood before it, a predator before its den. His shadow stretched long and sharp, a spear aimed directly at Cassian's heart. The silence in the hall was a living thing, thick with the unsaid judgments of the dozen lieutenants, the Iron Council, who lined the walls, their faces carved from stone and shadow. They were wolves, and they smelled blood. Betrayal? Damian's voice was not loud, but it cut through the hall like splintering steel. It is a simple word, a simple concept. It is the rot that brings down dynasties. He began to pace, his leather boots echoing with a chilling finality. We are the House of Cinders. We rose from the embers of a fallen world. Our laws are not written in ink, but in blood and fire. Our bonds are not forged in sentiment, but in loyalty. You know this, brother. The word brother was an insult, a shard of glass twisted in an open wound. Cassian lifted his head, his jaw tight. Defiance was the only thing he had left. It was not betrayal. It was love. A murmur, like the rustling of dry leaves, passed through the Iron Council. Damian stopped pacing, and a smile, thin and cruel, touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes were voids, blacker than the canals that snaked through the city's underbelly. Love, he repeated, tasting the word as if it were poison. You speak of love for a woman who was promised me, a woman who warmed my bed, a woman who bore the mark of my protection. He gestured, and from the shadows near the throne, 2 guards dragged Elira forward. She did not stumble. Her chin was high, her gaze locked on Damian with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. The whispers had already done their work. Her reputation was in tatters, her name a curse in the gilded mansions and soot-stained alleys of Veyros. But she stood unbroken, a pillar of defiance in the face of a tyrant. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, found Cassian's for a fleeting second. In them he saw not regret, but shared, terrible resolve. You took what was mine, Cassian, Damian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Not a coin, not a territory. You took apart my legacy. You showed our enemies, our allies, our entire world, that the blood of Veyro can be weakened by something as pathetic as a woman's touch. She was never yours to own, Cassian snarled, pushing himself to his feet. The guards tensed, their hands flying to the hilts of their bone-handled knives. Damian merely raised a hand, and they froze. Everything in this city is mine to own, including you. He walked until he was inches from Cassian, the scent of expensive amaro and cold ambition rolling off him. You were my heir, my right hand. You were to be the future of this house, and you threw it all away. I chose her, Cassian said, his voice raw. That is a choice you have never been capable of making. You only conquer. The slap was a crack of thunder in the silent hall. Cassian's head snapped to the side, the sting blossoming on his cheek. But the real pain was in Elira's sharp intake of breath. The cold of the obsidian hall seeped through the knees of Cassian's trousers, a damp, biting chill that felt like the city's very bones. He knelt on the polished basalt floor, a single shard of gaslight from the high, groin ceiling catching the silver signet ring on his brother's finger. That ring, the emblem of the House of Cinders, seemed to swallow the light, a miniature black hole of authority. Damian Veyro did not sit on the throne of ash, a monstrous thing of petrified wood and melted iron salvaged from the ruins of the First Empire. Instead, he stood before it, a predator before its den. His shadow stretched long and sharp, a spear aimed directly at Cassian's heart. The silence in the hall was a living thing, thick with the unsaid judgment of the dozen lieutenants, the Iron Council who lined the walls, their faces carved from stone and shadow. They were wolves, and they smelled blood. Betrayal. Damian's voice was not loud, but it cut through the hall like splintering steel. It is a simple word, a simple concept. It is the rot that brings down dynasties. He began to pace, his leather boots echoing with a chilling finality. We are the House of Cinders. We rose from the embers of a fallen world. Our laws are not written in ink, but in blood and fire. Our bonds are not forged in sentiment, but in loyalty. You know this, brother. The word brother was an insult, a shard of glass twisted in an open wound. Cassian lifted his head, his jaw tight. Defiance was the only thing he had left. It was not betrayal. It was love. A murmur, like the rustling of dry leaves, passed through the Iron Council. Damian stopped pacing, and a smile, thin and cruel, touched his lips. It did not reach his eyes. His eyes were voids, blacker than the canals that snaked through the city's underbelly. Love, he repeated, tasting the word as if it were poison. You speak of love for a woman who was promised to me, a woman who warmed my bed, a woman who bore the mark of my protection. He gestured, and from the shadows near the throne, 2 guards dragged Elira forward. She did not stumble. Her chin was high, her gaze locked on Damian with a hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. The whispers had already done their work. Her reputation was in tatters, her name a curse in the gilded mansions and soot-stained alleys of Veyros. But she stood unbroken, a pillar of defiance in the face of a tyrant. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, found Cassian's for a fleeting second. In them he saw not regret but shared, terrible resolve. You took what was mine, Cassian, Damian continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that carried more menace than any shout. Not a coin, not a territory. You took a part of my legacy. You showed our enemies, our allies, our entire world, that the blood of Veyro can be weakened by something as pathetic as a woman's touch. She was never yours to own, Cassian snarled, pushing himself to his feet. The guards tensed, their hands flying to the hilts of their bone-handled knives. Damian merely raised a hand, and they froze. Everything in the city is mine to own, including you. He walked until he was inches from Cassian, the scent of expensive amaro and cold ambition rolling off him. You were my heir, my right hand. You were to be the future of this house, and you threw it all away. I chose her, Cassian said, his voice raw. That is a choice you have never been capable of making. You only conquer. The slap was a crack of thunder in the silent hall. Cassian's head snapped aside, the sting blossoming on his cheek. But the real pain was in Elira's sharp intake of breath. Cassian locked eyes with Elira as the guard pushed his collar aside, exposing the skin below his left ear. He did not fight. He would not give his brother the satisfaction. He focused on her face, on the fierce, untamed fire in her eyes, committing to memory. This was the price. For her, for them. The brand was pressed to his skin. Searing agony, the smell of burning flesh, and a pain so absolute it stole his breath. He refused to scream, a guttural cry tearing from his throat instead. Through the haze of torment, he saw Damian's face, impassive, cold, triumphant. His brother, the source of his first lessons in loyalty, was now the author of his deepest hatred. They dragged him from the hall, past the silent, watching lieutenants, past the throne he would never inherit. They hauled Elira behind him, her face pale, but her expression a mask of cold fury. At the great iron gates of the Veyro estate, they were thrown onto the grimy cobblestones. The rain had begun to fall, a miserable, sooty drizzle that mixed with the steam rising from the city's forges. The gates, forged with the emblems of the House of Cinders, began to groan shut, sealing them out forever. Damian! Cassian roared, his voice breaking with rage and pain. You will regret this. I swear it on the ashes of our mother's grave. You will regret this. From the other side of the closing gates, Damian's voice came one last time, a final, cold pronouncement that would echo in Cassian's nightmares for years to come. Regret is a luxury for those who have something left to lose. Brother, you have nothing. The gates boomed shut, the sound echoing through the labyrinthine streets of Veyros. Cassian was left in the rain, the brand on his neck a searing promise of vengeance, with the only person in the world who understood his pain. Their gazes met, a silent vow passing between them. They were broken. They were exiled, but they were not defeated. The storm was just beginning. Chapter 1. The air in the catacombs tasted of rust, damp earth, and cheap, synthesized gin. It was a taste of a life unlived, a ghost breath. 7 years. 7 years since Cassian had last tasted clean air, since the name Veyro had meant anything other than a searing brand on his neck, a phantom limb he still ached for in the dead of night. He plunged the shovel into the pile of slag, the grating scrape of metal on metal echoing in the narrow tunnel. This was his penance, his purgatory, working the secret forges of the sump, turning industrial waste into crude iron ingots for sewer barons who paid in script and threats. His hands, once trained to wield a dueling foil, were now callous, scarred things, shaped by the shovel and the fire. The heat from a furnace was a constant, oppressive thing, but it was nothing compared to the cold fire of hatred that had been banked his heart for 2,555 days. "He's here." Elira's voice was a low murmur beside him, cutting through the din of the forge. She didn't need to say who. In their world of shadows, there was only one that mattered tonight. Caelan, the forge master of the old Veyro Legion, the man whose hands could coax secrets from steel, now a disgraced drunkard working in the deepest, most forgotten corner of the city. Damian had cast him out for a minor failure, an act of mercy compared to Cassian's exile, but Caelan's pride had been shattered just the same. They found him hunched over an anvil in a cavern lit by a single, sputtering gas lamp. The space reeked of stale sweat and quench oil. An empty bottle lay by his feet. He looked up as they approached, his eyes bloodshot, a map of broken veins on his cheeks. "Veyro," he spat, the name a curse. He meant Cassian, but the hatred was aimed at the ghost of his brother. "Not for a long time," Cassian said, his voice even. He and Elira moved into the faint light, letting him see them clearly. "Not conquerors, but supplicants. We've come to talk about a shared grievance, Caelan." The old smith's eyes narrowed, shifting from Cassian to Elira, a flicker of recognition in their depths. "The whore and the traitor, a ballad for the ages. What do you want from me?" "We want to give you back your pride," Elira said, her tone sharp but not unkind. "Damian took your forge. He took your name. He left you to rust in this pit. We offer you a new fire to tend." Caelan laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Revenge? Against Damian Veyro? You two are either braver than I remember or far more foolish." He picked up a hammer, its weight settling comfortably in his hand. It wasn't a direct threat. Not yet, but the message was clear. "Get out before I call the Watchers, and trade your heads for a month's worth of real whiskey." "He thinks you're broken," Cassian said, stepping closer, ignoring the hammer. "He thinks you're a forgotten tool, no longer of any use. That's what he does. He uses people until they break, then discards the pieces." Cassian's voice dropped, becoming intensely personal. "He told me once that loyalty was the only currency that mattered, but his loyalty is a one-way street. You know that. You gave him 20 years of your life. You forged the blades that secured his throne, and he threw you away over a single cracked shipment." Caelan's knuckles whitened around the hammer's shaft. The memories were a fresh wound. "We are not asking you to fight," Elira continued, her voice weaving through the tension. "Not with hammers and blades. That is his way. We will undo him with whispers, with numbers, with the slow, patient rust of sabotage. Your skill, Caelan. You can disrupt the quality of every weapon the House of Cinders produces. You can teach others. You can turn their own strength into a flaw, a weakness that will shatter at the crucial moment." The old smith stared at them, his chest rising and falling. The lure of purpose, of true revenge, was a powerful one. The anger in his eyes was slowly being tempered by a dawning, dangerous hope. He looked from Cassian's defiant stance to Elira's unwavering gaze. He saw not two broken exiles, but the first sparks of a wildfire. Finally, he lowered the hammer. The thud on the dirt floor sounded concession. "What you ask," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "It's suicide." "No," Cassian said, a faint, cold smile touching his lips. "It's justice." Caelan let out a long, shuddering breath, a lifetime of resentment draining from him, replaced by a terrifying resolve. He nodded once. "All right, I'm in. Tell me the plan." As the word plan left Cassian's lips, A new sound cut to the forge's familiar clangor, a soft, melodic chime. It was a sound that did not belong in the grime of the catacombs, a pure, crystalline note that seemed to freeze the very air. Cassian and Elira spun around. Kaelin's face went white with a fear that was older and deeper than his hatred for Damian. Standing in the arched entrance to the cavern were 3 figures, cloaked and silent. They wore porcelain masks, devoid of any feature save for a single, weeping eye painted in black lacquer. Their robes were the gray of ash, and in their hands they held not blades, but chimes of silver and bone. They were the Silent Sisters, the enigmatic enforcers of the Undercity's neutral zones, beholden to no crime family, yet feared by all. They were the arbiters of secrets, the executioners of those who broke the unspoken laws of the shadows. One of them lifted a hand, her fingers impossibly long and pale, and pointed directly at Cassian. The chime rang out again, a note that vibrated not in the ears, but in the soul. It was a summons, an accusation. Their secret alliance, their quiet storm, had just been discovered, and the judges were not the brother they sought to overthrow, but something far more ancient and inscrutable. Chapter 2. Fear was a lesson Cassian had learned late in life. For 20 years, he had known only the insulated arrogance of power, the certainty that his name was a shield. Exile had taught him the common fears of hunger and violence. But this was different. This was a primal, reverential terror, the kind a man feels when staring into the abyss and realizing it has a name. The Silent Sisters were a myth made manifest, a bedtime story told to frighten aspiring crime lords. They did not answer to the Iron Council or the heads of the great houses. They answered only to the city's oldest, most unspoken laws. Their judgment was not a sentence. It was an erasure. The hope he had so carefully kindled in Kaelin's forge felt like a child's candle in a hurricane, about to be extinguished with contemptuous ease. The sister who had pointed did not lower her hand. She took a single, gliding step forward, her ash-colored robes making no sound on the slag-dusted floor. The porcelain mask, with its single weeping eye, was a canvas of perfect, dead neutrality. Cassian instinctively moved to stand in front of Elira, a useless but necessary gesture. Kaelin had frozen, his face a mask of waxy dread, the hammer forgotten in his grip. "You make promises in the dark, son of Veyro," a voice whispered, though none of their masked mouths had moved. The sound was a chorus, a blend of a dozen feminine voices speaking as one from the air itself. It was the sound of ghosts passing judgment. You stir the embers, but you do not control the fire you seek to unleash. The accusation was not what he expected. There was no mention of Damian, no talk of treason. This was a crime against the city itself. "We seek justice," Cassian bit out, his voice tight. The chorus of whispers took on a sharp, mocking edge. Justice is a banner flown by fools and conquerors. What you seek is chaos. You gather the broken, the resentful. You plan to pull a single thread in the tapestry of the city, thinking only the thread will unravel. You are wrong. The whole weave will come undone. The sump will flood the canals. The forges will go cold. The houses will tear each other apart for the scraps. Damian Veyro is a tyrant, but he is a stable tyrant. His cage has bars we all understand. Every word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking at the heart of his own hidden fears. Had he considered the cost of the thousands of innocents caught in the gears of Veyros? Or was his own thirst for revenge blinding him to the consequences? Before he could answer, Elira stepped out from behind him. Her face was calm, her posture radiating a strength that seemed to push back against the oppressive aura of the sisters. She met the unblinking stare of the lead sister's mask. "The cage is already rusting." Elira's voice was clear and steady, a single, ringing note against their ghostly chorus. "Damian's stability is an illusion. He breaks the old pacts for sport. He bleeds his own allies for profit. He discards masters of their craft," she gestured to Kaelin, "because his pride is more fragile than their loyalty. His ambition is a cancer, and it is growing. You speak of balance, but a scale with a tumor on one side is not balanced. It is dying." The air crackled. The sisters were utterly still, their masked faces turned towards Elira. "You think we do this for a throne?" Elira continued, her voice rising with a passion Cassian had not heard since the night of their exile. We do this because the city is sick. Damian's rule is the infection. We are not the chaos. We are the cure. A painful one, perhaps. A bloody one, certainly. But we will cut out the rot before it consumes the bone. The whispers ceased. For a long, agonizing moment, the only sound was the hiss of the gas lamp and the drip of water from the cavern ceiling. The lead sister tilted her head, a gesture of cold, analytical curiosity. Words are wind, the chorus whispered, its tone flat, devoid of the earlier mockery. Intentions are smoke. The balance demands a weighing. It demands a price for the chaos you intend to unleash, cure or not. Name it, Cassian said, finding his voice again. The sister raised her other hand, and from a fold of her sleeve, she produced a small, flat stone of polished obsidian. She placed it on Kaelin's anvil. In the sunken archives, beneath the old basilica, lies the whispering ledger. It holds the original pacts between the founding houses, the laws that even your brother pretends to obey. The archives are flooded, watched. The water itself remembers the sins of those who enter. Damian has tried to retrieve it twice. Both times his men were lost, their minds shattered. He fears the place. You want us to retrieve it, Elira stated. We want you to prove your claim, the whispers answered. If you are the cure, you will not fear the city's memory. If you are merely another poison, the archives will claim you. Bring us the ledger. Then we will weigh your justice against Damian's order. We will be neutral. Fail, and we will erase you from the city's memory before the sun rises. It was an impossible task. The sunken archives were a legend, a place where the ghosts of the First Empire were said to drown intruders in visions of their own worst fears. It was a suicide mission, and it was their only chance. Cassian looked at Elira. Her eyes were bright with a terrifying, exhilarating fire. She gave him the barest of nods. They were in this together. We accept, Cassian said, without another sound. The three sisters seemed to dissolve into the shadows they came from, their forms melting into the darkness of the tunnel, as if they were never there at all. The oppressive presence vanished, leaving a ringing silence in the cold, hard reality of their task. The obsidian stone still sat on the anvil, a silent testament to the pact they had just made. Kaelin let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for an eternity. By the forges, I thought we were dead. We might be yet, Cassian murmured, his mind already racing, trying to formulate a plan to breach a place that had broken his brother's best men. Elira walked to the anvil, her fingers tracing the smooth, cold surface of the obsidian stone. They fear Damian's ambition as much as we do. This isn't just a test. It's a move. Cassian came to stand beside her, his gaze falling on the anvil. His blood ran cold. The lead sister had not placed the stone directly on the iron. She had set it upon a small, intricate object that must have been in her palm, leaving it behind. It was a token, carved from a shard of bone into the shape of a winter wolfsbane flower. He felt the world tilt on its axis. He had seen that symbol only once before, a lifetime ago. It was tattooed on the inner wrist of his mother, a secret sigil she had told him was for a society of gardeners, a lie he had been too young to question. She had called them the Daughters of the Quiet Root, a circle of the city's most powerful women who moved in the background, unseen and underestimated. The Silent Sisters were not just arbiters. They were his mother's people. The test, the ledger, the sudden intervention. It wasn't a random judgment. It was a summons from a past he never knew existed, a legacy far older and more dangerous than the one his brother had stolen from him. And he had no idea if they were guiding him to a throne or to a grave. Chapter 3. The wolfsbane token was cold in Cassian's palm, a sliver of bone and secrets that weighed more than any iron ingot he had ever hauled. His mother. The word was a hollow space in his memory, a room filled with the scent of dried roses, the whisper silk and profound, quiet sadness. He had mourned her as a tragic queen, a gentle soul trapped in the gilded cage of the Veyro dynasty, crushed by his father's ambition and his brother's cruelty. He had built his grief around that image, polished it like a precious stone. Now, that stone had cracked, revealing something far more complex and terrifying within. The Daughters of the Quiet Root, the Silent Sisters. The most feared, untouchable power in Veyros was not a myth. It was his mother's legacy. Every memory he had of her now felt like a lie, a carefully constructed stage play. Was her sadness a mask? Was her quiet a weapon? The thought was a betrayal far deeper than his brother's, for it came from within, poisoning the very foundations of his identity. He wasn't just the exiled son anymore. He was the son of a secret that had been watching him his entire life. To reach the sunken archives, one had to descend, not just through the city's layers of gothic spire and industrial slum, but into its very bowels, where the canals ran black and thick with the sins of centuries. This was the Drowner's Maw, a nexus of forgotten waterways that stank of alchemical runoff and rot. The only way through was by pole skiff, and the only person who dared navigate the maw was a crone known as Morwen. They found her in a shack cobbled together from rusted ship hulls and petrified wood, perched precariously over the sludge-filled water. Morwen was as ancient as the ruin she inhabited, her face a web of wrinkles, her eyes the color of silt, holding a disturbing, watery clarity. "The sisters sent you," she rasped, her voice like stones grinding together. She did not ask. She stared at the wolfsbane token Cassian held out, not with reverence, but with a weary, grudging respect. The price for passage to the basilica's roots is the same as it ever was. One secret for another. What secret do you want? Elira asked, her hand resting on the small Cassian's back, a silent anchor. Morwen's silted eyes fixed on her. Not from you, bright one. From him. She pointed a bony finger at Cassian. The city feels your rage. A Veyro turning on a Veyro. It sings in the water. Tell me the name of the first man you intend to turn against your brother. The true name. Give me that thread, and I will guide you to the needle. It was a dangerous price. To speak a name was to give it power, to expose a vulnerability in their fragile network. Cassian hesitated, but Elira's hand pressed slightly, a signal of trust. He had to give something to gain something. "Kaelin," he said, "the old forge master." A grim smile cracked Morwen's face. A worthy thread, rusted but strong. She turned and shuffled towards a waiting skiff, a flat-bottomed vessel that looked as though it were held together by mud and memory. Come, the water remembers all debts. The journey was a descent into a nightmare. Morwen pulled him through tunnels that grew narrower and darker, the water thick and oily, disturbed by things that brush against the hull. The air grew heavy, saturated with psychic residue that clung to the mind like soot. Faint, ghostly lights drifted in the water, the phosphorescent memories of the dead. The entrance to the archives was not a door, but a submerged archway, the top of which was carved with a screaming face from the First Empire. "The water here is not water," Morwen warned as she lit 2 alchemical lanterns, handing one to each of them. The greenish light cast long, dancing shadows. "It is liquid memory. It will show you what you fear most. It will whisper your own lies back to you. Trust nothing but the light of the ledger. It waits for you in the heart of the rotunda. And trust each other. The water feeds on doubt." With that, she pushed their skiff toward the archway and pulled away into the darkness without looking back. They slid into the flooded halls of the ancient basilica. The silence was immediate and absolute, broken only by the drip of water from the vaulted ceilings high above. The lantern light reflected off the black, mirror-like surface of the water, creating an illusion of a sky filled with green stars. The air was cold and carried a scent of wet stone and something else, regret. It began subtly, a whisper in Cassian's mind. "Weak." He flinched. The voice was his own. He gripped the edge of the skiff, his knuckles white. "You let him break you. You let him shame her." He saw it then, not as a memory, but as if it were happening now. The obsidian hall, the searing brand on his neck. Elira's face, pale and defiant. But this time, when he looked at her, her eyes were filled with pity. "You should have been stronger," her phantom whispered. "Cassian?" Elira's real voice cut through the vision. She had moved closer, her face tight with concern. "Don't listen." But the water was already working on her, too. He saw her expression shift, a flicker of deep-seated fear. "What do you see?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She shook her head, her eyes wide. "A throne. The throne of ash. And you're sitting on it." Her voice trembled. "You're wearing Damian's ring. and you're looking at me with his eyes, and you are calling me your queen." The vision was a poisoned arrow aimed at her deepest fear, that this quest for freedom would only lead to a new cage, that the man she loved would become the monster he sought to destroy. "That will never happen," he said, his voice a raw promise. "Liar," the water whispered to both of them at once. They pushed on, poling the skiff deeper into the labyrinth. The visions grew stronger, more insidious. Cassian saw his mother turning her back on him, her face a mask of disappointment. Elira heard the cruel laughter of the Veyros elite, their whispers of horror echoing off the stone walls. They fought it, anchoring themselves to the warmth of each other's hand, to the shared light of their lanterns. In the distance, a new light appeared, a soft, silver luminescence pulsing from the heart of a massive, circular chamber ahead, the rotunda, and in its center, on a raised dais just above the waterline, sat a book bound in what looked like cured skin, glowing with a gentle internal light. The whispering ledger. "We're here," Elira breathed, a note of triumph and exhaustion in her voice. They guided the skiff to the edge of the stone dais. Cassian stepped out, the water cold around his ankles. The silver light from the ledger was calming, pushing back the psychic whispers. It felt pure, ancient. As he climbed a few steps towards it, the sense of victory was so close he could taste it. He reached out, his fingers inches from the ancient binding. Suddenly, the black water in front of the dais began to churn. It swirled not with violence, but with a deliberate, horrifying purpose. The liquid memory gathered, coalescing, rising from the surface. It shifted and formed, the water shimmering as it took on a shape, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette that was sickeningly familiar. In seconds, a perfect, liquid replica of his brother stood before him, blocking his path. It was Damian, sculpted from the dark water of the archives, his features shifting and yet perfectly rendered, his eyes holding the same cold, dismissive cruelty. The water golem was a living monument to his trauma. He opened its mouth, but the voice that emerged was not Damian's. It was Cassian's own, twisted with every shred of self-doubt and fear the archives had dredged from his soul. "You cannot take the past, little brother," the golem said, its voice a perfect echo of his own despair. "Because the past is all you are." Chapter 4. For a breathless moment, Cassian was 17 again, standing in his brother's shadow, the weight of Damian's disappointment a physical force pressing down on him. The liquid golem was a perfect prison of memory, reflecting not just a monster, but the broken boy who had created him. The voice, his own voice, laced with venom he had only ever directed inward, was the cruelest part. It was a whisper that haunted his sleep, the doubt that gnawed at his resolve in the lonely, pre-dawn hours. All the hatred he had nurtured for 7 years, all the strength he had forged in the grime and fire of the sump, felt like ash. How could he raise a sword against his own soul? This creature wasn't just a guardian. It was his own weakness, given form and a voice, and it knew every crack in his armor. "You see," the golem purred, its watery form shimmering in the dual light of the lanterns and the ledger. "He built a throne of fear, and you built a shelter of pity. You are two sides of the same worthless coin." Instinct took over. With a roar of pure rage, Cassian lunged, drawing the short, heavy blade he carried for work in the tunnels. He thrust it deep into the golem's chest. There was no resistance. His arm plunged into icy, viscous liquid up to the elbow. The golem didn't flinch. It simply flowed around the blade, its form undisturbed. It laughed, and the sound was the gurgle of a drowning man. Cassian pulled his arm back, his blade dripping with black, memory-slick water. The golem reformed instantly, a cruel smirk on its liquid face. "You cannot kill a shadow, little brother, especially not your own." It struck then not with a fist, but with a tendril of water that shot out and wrapped around Cassian's ankle. It wasn't the grip that hurt, it was the cold, an invasive, psychic chill that flooded him with a vision so potent it brought him to his knees. He saw Elira, years from now, in a grand room in the Veyro estate. She was dressed in silks, her hair pinned with jewels. She looked beautiful, and she looked utterly empty, a child with Cassian's eyes played at her feet. And as the phantom Cassian entered the room, wearing Damian's ring, she flinched. "No!" he gasped, clutching his head, the vision searing itself onto his mind. "This is your victory," the golem whispered, its watery hand now resting on Cassian's shoulder, the cold seeping deeper. "You will win the throne only to become the tyrant. You will free her only to build her a more beautiful cage. It is the Veyro way. It is in your blood." From the skiff, Elira watched, her face a mask of horror. She could not see his vision, but she could see its effect. Cassian was faltering, his breath coming in ragged bursts, his eyes wide with terror that had nothing to do with the physical threat. The archives were breaking him from the inside out. "Cassian!" she yelled, her voice echoing in the vast, dead space. "It's a lie. It's the water." But her voice seemed a world away. The golem leaned closer, its face inches from his. "She chose you because you were broken," it murmured in his ear. "A project, a stray to be mended. Once you are whole, once you have power, what use will she have for you then? She will see the monster you truly are. She will see him." That was it, the final, perfect blow. The fear that lived in the deepest part of him, that his love was not earned but given in pity, that his victory would only prove his brother right. He sagged, the fight draining out of him, his sword slipping from his numb fingers and clattering on the stone. "Look at me." Elira's voice was a command now, sharp and fierce, slicing through the psychic fog. "Cassian Veyro, look at me." He forced his head up. Her face was blazing, her eyes two chips of stormy sea fire. "That thing is an echo in the sewer," she cried, her words ringing with absolute conviction. "It is made of your pain, and your pain is real. I will not deny you that, but it is not the truth. It is not you." She pointed a trembling finger at the golem. "That is his poison, living in your memory. Are you going to let him win, even here? Are you going to let him poison us both?" Her words were a bucket of cold, clean water, shocking him out of the stupor. An echo, his poison. He looked at the golem, which still wore its triumphant smirk, and for the first time he saw it not as a reflection of himself, but as a cage built from his brother's cruelty. He had been living inside it for 7 years. He rose slowly to his feet, leaving his sword on the ground. He would not fight it. He would defy it. "You're right," he said, his voice quiet but steady. He wasn't speaking to the golem. He was speaking to the memory, to the ghost of his brother. "You broke me. You took my name, my future. You hurt her. That pain is mine. I own it." He took a step closer to the golem. "But my love for her, my desire for a world that doesn't belong to you, that is also mine, and it is stronger than any scar you ever gave me." As he spoke, Elira acted. Her eyes darted from the glowing ledger to the alchemical lantern in the skiff. "Trust the light of the ledger." She grabbed the lantern and, shielding her eyes, angled its polished reflector. She caught the pure, silver light of the ancient book and focused it, creating a brilliant, concentrated beam. She aimed it directly at the heart of the water golem. The effect was instantaneous. The pure, silver light of truth and law struck the creature of doubt and fear. The golem shrieked, a sound of 1,000 whispers screaming at once. Its form began to boil and destabilize, the black water turning gray and translucent. It could not hold its shape against the focused light of the city's oldest truths. "You are nothing but a memory," Cassian said, his voice filled with cold, hard finality as he walked straight through the dissolving figure. "And memories fade." The golem dissipated into a cloud of foul-smelling mist, which was then sucked back into black water, leaving only ripples behind. The oppressive psychic weight in the rotunda vanished. The air was clean again. Without a second's hesitation, Cassian snatched the whispering ledger from its dais. The moment his fingers touched the strange, skin-like binding, a warm spread of his arm, and a sense of profound clarity settled over his mind. The whispers of the archives were gone, replaced by a quiet hum of power. "Let's go," he said, turning and leaping back into the skiff, before it decides to build another one. They pulled frantically, their hearts still hammering, their passage back to the flooded halls a desperate, silent race. They didn't speak, saving their breath, their lantern casting a single, dancing light against the oppressive dark. They burst through the submerged archway back into the filth of the drowner's maw, gasping the toxic, yet blessedly real, air. The shore where they had met Morwen was empty. Her shack was dark, her pole skiff gone. She left us. Elira breathed, scanning the dark, empty tunnels. They were stranded deep in the city's guts, with the most valuable prize in the underworld in their possession. A soft splash echoed from a nearby tunnel. They both spun toward the sound, Cassian drawing his blade again, Elira raising her lantern. A single pole skiff glided out of the darkness, moving with an unnatural, silent grace. Standing at the stern, poling the skiff with slow, deliberate movements, was a figure in the ash-gray robes of a silent sister. Her featureless porcelain mask, with its single weeping eye, seemed to absorb the lantern light. She did not speak. She did not acknowledge the ledger in Cassian's hands. She simply brought the skiff alongside theirs and gestured with one pale, long-fingered hand, an unmistakable invitation to come aboard. They hadn't just been tested. They had been watched, and their escape from this watery hell was now in the hands of the very power that had sent them into it, their motives as dark and unreadable as the water of the maw itself. The journey on the sister skiff was a passage through a realm between life and death. Cassian sat with a warm, humming ledger on his lap, the weight of it a comfort against the cold dread seeping from their silent guide. He was no longer Cassian the exile, the forge worker, the ghost. Holding this book, he felt the resonance of his own bloodline, an echo of power he had long forgotten. Yet the victory in the archives felt hollow, a single battle won in a war whose map he was only just beginning to comprehend. He watched Elira, her profile carved by the lantern's glow, her gaze fixed on the endless dark ahead. They had survived his demon, but the token in his pocket was a constant, cold reminder of another ghost, his mother. He was being led to the veins of the city by her secret, and the silence from their guide felt less like a choice and more like a shared, ancient grief. He was a stranger in his own history, and he was beginning to suspect the cage he'd escaped was far larger than his brother's ambition. The silent sister pulled them not back towards the known canals of the Drowner's Maw, but deeper, into a tributary Cassian had never known existed. The tunnel walls, slick with an unnatural, glowing moss, closed in around them. Ahead, a waterfall of shimmering, silver liquid, alchemical waste in the forges above, cascaded from a fissure in the rock. It should have been a dead end, but the sister did not slow. She guided the skiff directly toward the toxic falls. "Hold your breath," Elira murmured, her hand finding his. They plunged through the shimmering curtain. For a moment, there was only the roar of liquid and a metallic taste on the air. Then silence. They had passed through into a hidden grotto, a vast cavern untouched by the city's industrial rot. The air was cool and clean, smelling of damp earth and night-blooming flowers. The only light came from the glowing moss, which cast a soft, silvery luminescence over a large, placid pool of crystal-clear water. In the center of the grotto, ancient, pale roots, thick as a man's torso, descended from the ceiling, their tips trailing in the water. Other sisters, a dozen of them, stood motionless around the pool's edge, their masked faces turned towards the newcomers. They parted as Cassian and Elira stepped onto the damp, mossy ground. At the far end of the grotto, seated on a throne woven from the living roots, was a woman who wore no mask. She was ancient, her face a tapestry of wrinkles so fine they looked like spun silver, yet her eyes were ageless, black and sharp with a terrifying intelligence. This was the matron of the quiet root. "You have the ledger," she said, her voice a dry whisper, like rustling leaves. It was not a question. Cassian stepped forward, holding out the book. "The price is paid. We asked for your neutrality." The matron's eyes flickered to the wolfsbane token Cassian still clutched. Neutrality was never the offer. It was a test. She beckoned him closer. "Your mother's blood runs in your veins, Cassian Veyro. Did you think we would stand aside and watch her legacy burn to ash in the hands of her monstrous son?" Cassian froze, the puzzle pieces of his life rearranging themselves with dizzying speed. "The Whispering Ledger is more than a book of laws," the matron continued, her gaze intense. "It is a key. Its words, when spoken by one of the founding bloodlines, resonate with the city's bones. They reveal the secret architecture of power, the hidden conduits, the weak points in the foundations, the financial arteries. Damian wants it for conquest. We want it for balance. Your mother, Alessa, wanted it for you. My mother, Cassian's voice was a choked whisper. She was one of us, the matron said, a flicker of something like sorrow in her ancient eyes. She was not the fragile flower you remember. She was a root, deep and strong, trying to choke the poison in her own garden. She saw the tyrant Damian would become. Before the sickness took her, she made a pact with us. If Damian ever threatened to shatter the balance of Veyros, we were to put her youngest son to the test. She believed the cruelty he suffered would either break him or forge him into something stronger. She believed in you. The grief was a physical blow, knocking the air from his lungs. His mother hadn't been a victim. She had been a strategist, a silent player in a game, so deep he had never even seen the board. Her death wasn't just a tragedy. It was a removal of the final check on Damian's ambition. This quest, this trial, was his inheritance. What do you want us to do? Elira asked, her voice steady, pulling Cassian back from the brink. The matron turned her sharp gaze to Elira. We will not fight your war, but we will give you the weapons. She gestured to the ledger. Damian's power is not in his soldiers. It is in his wealth. He bleeds the city through 1,000 hidden cuts. The ledger will show you how to close them. She instructed Cassian to open the book and read a specific passage aloud. As he spoke the ancient words, the clear water of the central pool swirled. An image appeared on its surface, a glowing, intricate map of Veyros, but a version no one had ever seen. It was a web of light, showing the pneumatic tubes, hidden ledgers, and secret accounts that made up the Obsidian Bank, the heart of Damian's financial empire. His wealth is a river, the matron whispered, and you will divert its course. Kalen, the Forge Master, will know how to breach the transport system. You will bleed him dry, coin by coin, until his empire is a hollow shell. They left the sanctum armed with more than a plan. They left with a purpose that felt pure and absolute. The sisters guided them back to a tunnel that emerged into familiar grime of the sump, a stone's throw from Kalen's forge. They were no longer just rebels. They were agents of a power as old as the city itself. They found Kalen pacing like a caged beast, his relief at seeing them alive warring with his terror of what they'd become. Cassian laid the ledger on the anvil, its soft glow pushing back the forge's greasy shadows. It begins now, Kalen, Cassian said, his voice ringing with newfound authority. We're going to rob my brother blind. As Elira began to relay the information from the ledger, Kalen's eyes lit with a craftsman's fire. He grabbed a piece of charcoal and began sketching furiously on a slate slab, schematics of pressure valves, pneumatic junctions, sorting mechanisms. The impossible heist was becoming a tangible, mechanical problem. The quiet storm was finally gathering force. They were so engrossed in the plan, in the exhilarating promise of their first real blow against Damian, that none of them heard the soft thud on the slag heap just outside the cavern's entrance. It was Kalen's youngest apprentice, a boy of 10 named Finn, his face smeared with soot and wide with terror. He stumbled into the forge, holding something small and metallic in his trembling hands. It was a mechanical bird, wrought from black iron and silver filigree, one of its wings twisted and broken. A Veyro messenger drone. It fell from the sky, Finn stammered. Just now. Cassian's blood ran cold. The drones were for priority messages between Damian and his Iron Council. One would never be sent to the sump. He took the bird from the boy. The message cylinder was still sealed. Elira's fingers were deft as she unfastened it, her expression a mask of hardened resolve. There was no official scroll inside, no coded command, just a single piece of heavy cream-colored parchment, folded once. She opened it. Her breath hitched. It was a sketch, rendered in charcoal in an artist's hand, so detailed it was almost alive. It was her face, but not as she was now. It was her from years ago, younger, her hair unbound, a defiant smile on her lips, the way she looked the last time she'd shared a glass of wine with Damian, before Cassian had ever entered the picture. It was a memory, captured with possessive, obsessive tenderness that was more terrifying than any threat. Beneath the portrait, 3 words were scrawled in Damian's sharp, elegant script. I am waiting. The plan, the ledger, the sisters. All of it felt like a child's game. This was never just about the city. While they moved in the shadows, believing themselves to be the hunters, the true predator had been watching them all along, and he had just reminded them what he was really hunting for. Chapter 6. The charcoal sketch was not a threat. It was a cage. Damian's message was a reminder that, in his mind, Elira was still possession, a memory he owned and could render at will. Looking at the drawing, Elira felt a cold, clean rage crystallize in her veins. For 7 years, she had been the ghost at Cassian's side, the whispered name in the story of his exile. But the sketch was not about him. It was about her. Damian had never seen her as a person, only as a beautiful mirror for his own vanity. Her love for Cassian was not a choice he respected, but an act of theft he could not forgive. She carefully folded the parchment, the charcoal smudging against her fingertips. She would not burn it. She would keep it as a promise. When this was over, Damian Veyro would not remember her as a possession he had lost, but as the architect of his ruin. The quiet storm now had a name, and it was hers. The dismantling of the House of Cinders was not a war. It was a dissection. It began weeks later, a death by 1,000 cuts, each one precise, silent, and fatal. Armed with the Ledger's secrets and the Sister Silent network, they bled Damian's empire from the inside out. Kalen, his forge roaring with a renewed and terrible purpose, crafted ingenious mechanical parasites. These clockwork saboteurs, small enough to fit in a man's palm, were introduced into the pneumatic tube system of the Obsidian Bank. They did not steal, they redirected. Ingots of refined iron were rerouted to scrapyards, bearer bonds were sent to dead-end chutes in the sump, and streams of wealth trickled away into forgotten accounts controlled by the sisters. Damian saw only clerical errors, minor losses, the cost of doing business in the city of thieves. He did not see the hemorrhage. While financial bloodletting continued, Elira moved to capture the heart. Her target was Loren, captain of the Veyro enforcers, a man who had served the house for 30 years with a loyalty so profound it was mistaken for a lack of ambition. He was the city's quiet soldier, respected by all, feared by many, and noticed by no one consequence, least of all Damian. She found him not in the barracks, but in the undercroft of a crumbling city temple, tending to the orphans of men who had died in Damian's service. This was a secret penance, the act that kept his soul clean in a dirty world. He turned as she approached, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword, his face a mask of weary discipline. "Lady Elira," he said, his voice a low gravel, "you are a long way from the shadows." "The shadows are everywhere, Captain," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I'm here to ask if you've grown tired of the darkness your dawn casts over the city." Lauren's eyes, the color of faded steel, narrowed. "My loyalty is to the House of Cinders, as was Kalen's, as was my Cassian's," she countered. "The house you serve is not the one you swore an oath to. It is a hollowed-out thing, a monument to one man's pride. Damian breaks the old pacts. He starves his allies to feed his vanity. He sends good men to die for foolish grudges. Tell me, Loren, when you give the coin of condolence to these children's mothers, do you tell them their fathers died for good of the house, or for Damian's ego?" The question was a blade, and it struck true. He was silent, the weight of 100 such condolences pressing down on him. "We are going to remove him," Elira said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Not for power, not for a throne, to restore the balance, to give Veyros a leader who remembers that loyalty is earned, not demanded, a leader who tends his roots." She glanced meaningfully at the orphans around them. "But we cannot do it without you. The enforcers trust you. The Iron Council respects you. When the time comes, they will look to you. You are the city's true center of gravity." He stared at her, his internal conflict a silent, raging war. To betray his dawn was to break the most sacred oath of his life, but to allow Damian to continue was to betray the very city he had sworn to protect. He looked at Elira, at the fierce, unwavering hope in her eyes, and saw not a traitor, but a leader. "When the time comes," he said, his voice thick with the gravity of his choice, "the house will have its reckoning." The reckoning came a month later. The river of Damian's wealth had run dry. The whispers of his secrets, of broken pacts, of murdered rivals, of a paranoia that bordered on madness, had become a roar. The other crime families of Veyros, sensing weakness, began to probe his territories. Damian, enraged and cornered, called the Iron Council to the Obsidian Hall, intending to demand a bloody purge to restore order. He stood before the throne of ash, his face pale with fury. "There is a rot in my house," he began, his voice shaking with rage, "and I will burn it out, starting now." "The rot is not in the house, Damian," a voice called out. "It is on the throne." Loren stepped forward from the line of lieutenants, his hand resting on his sword. One by one, for other members of the Iron Council stepped forward with him. The defection was absolute. The great doors of the hall groaned open. Cassian and Elira entered, not as exiles, but as judges. They were flanked by a dozen of Kaelin's men, their faces grim, their new, flawless weapons gleaming in the gaslight. Damian stared, his face a mask of disbelief, his gaze finally settling on Cassian. "You!" he breathed, the word a curse. "The ghost." "Every house has its ghost, brother," Cassian said, his voice calm and cold. "You just forgot to bury yours deep enough." The council, seeing the tide had turned, that Damian was a king with no soldiers and no gold, was swift. They stripped him of his titles, his name, his power. The reign of Damian Veyro was over. A lieutenant, speaking for the council, turned to Cassian. "You have done what none thought possible. You have bled the tyrant and reclaimed your birthright. The House of Cinders is yours, Don Cassian." All eyes fell on him. The throne, his throne, was empty. This was the moment of his ascension, the culmination of 7 years of hatred and planning. He could taste the victory, and it tasted like ashes. He looked at Elira, who gave him a small, trusting smile. He took her hand. "I thank the council for their wisdom," Cassian said, his voice ringing through the hall. "But you are mistaken. We did not wage this war for a throne, but for the freedom to walk away from them." A stunned silence fell. "The House of Cinders needs a leader, not a king," Cassian continued. "It needs a foundation, not a conqueror." He turned and looked directly at the man who had risked everything on a whisper of hope. "It needs a man who has served it, bled for it, and understands its people. It needs a quiet soldier who has never sought glory, but has earned respect. I name Loren as your new Don." Loren stared, shocked, but a slow understanding dawned on his face. This was not a trick. It was a gift, a responsibility. The council murmured, but they saw the truth in Cassian's words. Loren was the anchor they needed. They nodded their assent. As Loren, with a look of profound, weary gravity, walked toward the throne of ash, Damian's enforcers moved to put him in chains. He did not struggle. His eyes, burning with a hateful, uncomprehending fire, were locked on Cassian. "To a gutter captain?" Damian hissed as they dragged him past. "You destroy me for him? A man who follows orders." Cassian met his brother's gaze one last time, no trace of hatred left in him, only a vast, cold pity. "That's why he is worthy, Damian. He knows how to serve something other than himself. It's a lesson you never learned." He turned his back on his brother, on the throne, on the ghost of the House of Cinders. He and Elira walked from the Obsidian Hall, hand in hand, leaving the politics and the power behind. They emerged from the estate's great iron gates into the perpetual twilight of Veyros. For the first time, it did not feel like a prison. And so, the saga of the House of Cinders draws to a close, not with a roar of triumph from a newly crowned king, but with the quiet, defiant footsteps of two souls choosing a different path. Cassian and Elira, once defined by exile and revenge, found their true victory not in claiming a throne, but in proving that love and freedom are empires far more enduring than any forged in blood and ash. Damian Veyro, the self-proclaimed mafia king, was left to witness the flourishing of a city he never truly understood, ruled by a man he never truly saw. His defeat was not just a loss of power, but a bitter, ironic lesson in worthiness. Their journey through the dark heart of Veyros, from the grim forges of the Sump to the hidden grotto of the Silent Sisters, was one of betrayal, redemption, and the shattering of old illusions. It taught us that even in the most corrupt of worlds, true power lies not in dominance, but in purpose, not in ownership, but in choice. The ashes of the throne remind us that sometimes the greatest strength is found in letting go, And the most profound justice is poetic, whispered by the winds of change rather than shouted from the highest spire. If the echoes of Veyros, its secrets, its struggles, and its whispers of forgotten magic have captured your imagination, then you've only just begun to scratch the surface of the world we build. Here at Shadow Song Stories, we delve into the depths of mafia fantasy, gritty revenge tales, and epic sagas that blend the mundane with the magical, always prioritizing the raw emotion and nail-biting suspense that keep you glued to your headphones. Don't let the stories end here. If you enjoyed the intricate plot twists, the emotional depth, and the captivating world of the Ashes of the Throne, then be sure to subscribe to Shadow Song Stories right now. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter in our sprawling universe of narrated fantasy, where every shadow holds a secret and every song tells a tale. Dive deeper with us and discover your next obsession. Join the Shadow Song Stories family and let your imagination roam free.